Amazing archaeological discoveries come in all shapes and sizes. A whole ancient city would obviously be classed as a remarkable discovery, but there are some artifacts that could fit into the palm of your hand that would blow your mind just as much. To prove our point, let's take another trip through a digital world of incredible archaeological discoveries in this video. We begin with the most humble of discoveries, a shoe. To be more specific, it's the oldest shoe ever found in Germany. It's around 2,070 years old and was discovered in the bog of Bregeler Moor close to Leunha in June 2021. Bogs often do an excellent job of preserving anything that's thrown into them, which is a fact we see in action yet again here. There's enough surviving detail to see that this is a kind of sandal, with a pierced leather toe and a string of leather threaded through holes as a means of closing the shoe and keeping it tight to the foot. The shoe was found next to a wooden plank of around the same age, indicating that the people who lived here 2,000 years ago built a wooden bridge across the bog, but that the bridge eventually sank. Of course, the real mystery here is what happened to the other shoe, which doesn't appear to be present. Perhaps this individual only lost one shoe in the bog while trying to cross it, leaving them to walk home cursing their luck with one bare foot. Here's another discovery from June 2021, but be warned that it's an altogether less pleasant one. That month in Rutland, England, archaeologists found the remains of a slave who was buried in a ditch with their shackles still attached during the country's Roman era. The shackles, which were around the man's ankles, are still intact and still locked shut. Analysis of the remains suggests that the individual buried in the pit was male and close to the age of 30. He was discovered while a married couple in the village of Great Casterton were building a conservatory for their home, so you can imagine how surprised they were to find there had been a slave buried under their garden for centuries. Radiocarbon dating indicates that the buried man passed away somewhere close to the year 226. This is a rare piece of physical proof that slavery existed in Britain during the Roman era. It's always been generally accepted by historians that people kept slaves back then, but direct physical evidence is hard to find. That makes this an important find, no matter how unsavory it might be. As the glaciers of ice continue to melt and the ice recedes, it gives up objects that have been frozen for centuries. In May 2021, the melting ice of Breheimen National Park surrendered a fantastically well-preserved wooden box with leather carrying straps, and archaeologists couldn't wait to get it open and find out what was inside. They had to do the work slowly and carefully, but their mystery box eventually turned out to be full of candles. Tests that have since been carried out on the box suggest that it was made around the year 1475. The beeswax candles inside it would have been quite expensive back then. Candles like this were often used to illuminate seasonal summer farms in Norway, where cattle were temporarily taken to graze for the summer, and supplies were basic, even by the standards of the time. It's unlikely there would have been any lamps inside the farm, so candles like these would have been the only sources of light in the evening. That would have made their loss all the more costly for whichever unfortunate traveling farmer dropped them. We're going back to the UK now, where a few precious bronze pieces of an ancient Celtic chariot were discovered in Melton Mowbray, England in October 2014. The discovery was made inside Burrow Hill, an Iron Age hill fort that was already known to archaeologists and had been considered fully explored, until this find turned up right underneath the noses of the experts. The pieces come from a chariot that was built about 2,300 years ago and are parts of the vehicle's fittings. Such elaborate decorations would only have appeared on the chariot of someone who enjoyed high status, perhaps an important warrior or a noble. The decorative patterns on the metalwork are similar to the Triskele motif that appears on the flag of the Isle of Man. although there isn't thought to be a connection. Based on the arrangement of the pieces, it's likely that they were once contained inside a box that was buried and then ceremonially burnt. There's no sign of human remains here, though, so the ceremony may have marked a different occasion, perhaps even the final closure of the fort. You might have heard the phrase, "hit the mother lode" at some point in the past. It isn't a phrase that's often uttered by archaeologists, but it was used in the context of this June 2021 discovery in a Turkish olive grove. There, 3 miles outside the town of Iznik, archaeologists have found an incredible collection of beautifully decorated Imperial Roman-era sarcophagi. It's looking increasingly likely that the entire area may once have been a necropolis. The first of the discoveries, a 7-ton solid marble sarcophagus, has already been taken from the site and given pride of place in the Garden of Iznik Museum. The carvings on its side depict a scene from the Iliad, in which Agamemnon takes Briseis from Achilles, who had enslaved her after he murdered her family. Historians have noted that scenes involving Achilles were often chosen for reliefs on the sarcophagi of the era, but they're not sure why. It's not as if he's depicted as a particularly pleasant person. If the discoveries keep coming at their current rate, the whole area is likely to be turned into an open-air museum. Archaeologists in Finland got very excited about the discovery of this snake staff in June 2021. Although looking at the artifact's size, it might be more accurate to call it a snake stick. The reason for their excitement is that the stick is thought to have belonged to a Neolithic-era shaman some 4,000 years ago, and is a dead ringer for the snake staffs that often appear in the region's Neolithic-era rock art. The staff was found preserved within a layer of peat, close to the town of Järvensuo. There's a prehistoric settlement here in the wetland, where people arrived 6,000 years ago and stayed for around 2,000 years. Depictions of people from this era carrying snake staffs can be found on rocks not only elsewhere in Finland, but also in parts of Russia. This is the first time that a real staff of this kind has ever been found. It's likely that its owner used it in magical rituals of some kind, but the nature and purpose of those rituals are things that we'll probably never understand. Since we're talking about remarkable finds in Finland, here's a wooden lion's head that was recovered from a Finnish shipwreck in September 2021. It might not be looking its best, but that's because it spent the past couple of centuries 200 feet below the water in the Gulf of Finland. Bringing it back to the surface was a controversial move by archaeologists, as Finnish tradition dictates that shipwrecks are to be left alone. When the wreck was first discovered close to the coast of Kikkonumi in 2005, the carved head was attached to a beam on the side of the ship's bow. When explorers returned to the wreck in 2021, they found that the head had fallen off and was lying on the seabed. They feared it would rot away to nothingness on the hard seabed, so they brought it back to the shore with them. Having done that, they hoped to analyze the head with a view to determining the place the ship came from and perhaps even its identity. It appears to be an 18th century vessel, so there ought to be a record of its loss somewhere. If you go to the movie theater often, you might have a favorite seat. If you regularly attend your local sports team's stadium to watch games, you might even have a season ticket and a guaranteed seat. There's nothing new about that idea. In October 2021, archaeologists searching the Roman amphitheater of Pergamon in Turkey came across blocks of private seats, engraved with the names of the people they were presumably reserved for. The blocks are inside the amphitheater's cavea, which is a little odd because the cavea is usually thought of as the cheaper seating section, and therefore not the place you'd expect to find private seats. The cheapness is reflected in the building materials used to make the seats, which clash with the materials around them. These may have been comparatively rich poor people, rather than comparatively poor rich people, an idea backed up by the fact that the names are Latin but written in Greek. Pergamon fell into Roman hands when King Attalus III pledged his land to Rome 2,200 years ago. The amphitheater was added during the rule of Hadrian during the 2nd century. As is the case with almost all Caribbean, Central American, and South American territories, there was life in Guadalupe long before European settlers arrived. The issue for historians is that we know less about pre-Columbian Guadalupe than we do about perhaps any other place in the region. That's what makes discoveries like this one invaluable. It's a collection of 113 people who were all buried together between the 11th and 13th centuries in what's now the township of Les Abymes. Archaeologists have never found burials from this era clustered so close together in Guadalupe before. The level of acidity in the volcanic soil has an unfortunate habit of destroying anything that's buried in it. Archaeologists also identified hundreds of post holes in the area around the bodies, suggesting that there was a large settlement here. Digging further, they located 50 pits full of stone tools, fragments of pottery, and animal bones. This tiny area of Guadalupe could yet turn out to be the region's equivalent to Pompeii. At the very least, it will give scientists a new databank of DNA to help them examine the genetic makeup of these long-lost people. It turns out that you can tell a lot about a place from the wooden stakes and piles that its ancient occupants drove into the ground. In April 2021, a wooden stake discovery helped to prove that Lucerne in Switzerland was home to a human settlement during the prehistoric era. The stakes once supported pile dwellings in an area that 3,000 years ago would have been the shore of Lake Lucerne. They're now underneath the water and were found during the construction of a new pipeline. We once thought that Lucerne was settled around the beginning of the 10th century. We now know that the first settlement appeared around 2,000 years earlier than that. There isn't much left of the old settlement now, just a few broken pieces of pottery and 30 wooden stakes, but that isn't necessarily surprising. The waters of the lake have risen by almost 20 feet since the 15th century, and were churned extensively when mills were added during the 19th century, so much of what was once here would long since have been washed away. Archaeologists in Turkey confirmed the discovery of a Roman-era gallery underneath Topkapi Palace in Istanbul in April 2021. As we look at it though, bear in mind that this isn't the sort of gallery that you're probably imagining. The Romans did love art, but they didn't create places that we'd recognize as art galleries. Instead, this construction likely served as a cistern that collected rainwater for the palace. It's directly underneath the exposed courtyard, so it's perfectly placed for such a task. It's large for a cistern, but then again, this wasn't any old courtyard. It was the largest of the courtyards at the palace, and used to be the home to the Hagia Irene Church. At the time of the excavation, 3 sections of the gallery were found. Some of the experts at the scene believed there might be more to be found if they had more time to dig, so a second expedition is planned for 2022 to see if the cistern is even larger than it already appears to be, and whether it connects to any similar facilities elsewhere beneath the palace. When a rich Roman had valuables they wanted to protect, they put them inside an Archiferata. You can think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of a safe or a stronghold. Finding an Archiferata is a very rare occasion for an archaeologist, but it happened in 1994 at the site of Casa del Mitreo in Spain. The precious artifact was in such a delicate state that it proved to be impossible to extract it from its location until 2019. It owes its state of preservation to the fact that the Casa del Mitreo, a Roman villa, burned down around it about 1,600 years ago. The strongbox was kept safe by a cavity that was formed around it by falling debris, and then became buried under a thick layer of ash. The Archiferata might be made of wood, but it keeps prying hands away from valuable goods by virtue of the fact that it's extensively booby-trapped with damage-dealing features, like iron spikes. Scientists don't think there's anything inside it, but because they can't be sure that they've identified all the booby traps, they haven't made any attempt to open it. Even in its unopened state, its value comes from the fact it's one of only 4 surviving artifacts of its kind in the world. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!